Sure. My name is Erin Corcoran, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kroc Institute and a faculty member here at the Keough School for Global Affairs. Just want to take a moment to acknowledge the Kroc Institute's presence on the traditional homelands of Native peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Miami, Peoria, and particularly the Pokagon and Potawatomi, who have been using this land for thousands of years and continue to do so. We recognize our own place in the story and the practices of colonialism and understand that our responsibilities extend beyond this gesture of land acknowledgement. We also must reflect on the University of Notre Dame's past, present, and future relationship with the original stewards of this land and actively pursue ways to amend this troubled relationship. We also note that a land acknowledgement alone could be meaningless if it is not accompanied by active work to address the structural injustice and violence perpetrated by Indigenous peoples around the globe, both historically and currently. The Kroc Institute is committed to working to address these harms and to find ways to contribute to a constructive transformation through our teaching, research, and peace-building efforts. We hope that our celebration today will honor the traditions of these Native peoples as we recognize a guest who is working at the intersection of development, democracy, and peace building. At the Kroc Institute, we are constantly aware that the accomplishment and fascinating career paths of our alumni are a chief source of our pride. Since 1987, when the first 4 undergraduate students were awarded a concentration in peace studies, the Kroc Institute has graduated over 2,000 alumni. This includes over 1,300 from what is now the undergraduate supplementary major or minor in peace studies, over 700 alumni from the master's program, and 52 from our doctoral program in peace studies. After 39 years, our alumni are now at work in over 100 countries around the world. Kroc Institute alumni have found a variety of ways to integrate peace studies into their professional work. Some identify as professional peace builders, while others have found ways to incorporate the knowledge and values of peace studies in a variety of distinct professions, from religious leadership to teaching, from journalism to parenting. The Kroc Institute's Distinguished Alumni Award honors graduates of Notre Dame's Peace Studies programs whose careers and lives exemplify the ideals of peace building across the globe. In the past, we have honored Kenyan NGO leader George Wachira, development innovator Molly Kinder, educator and activist Kursona Wise Whitehead of Baltimore, human rights lawyers and advocates including Chabe Aguirre of the International Criminal Court, Viana Calusi of Amnesty International, and Adriana Quiones of UN Women. We've also honored Ambassador Juana Popo of Romania, Chinese filmmaker Jin Yi, Nigerian journalist Obi Ankandike, theater director and writer P. Carl, Valerie Hickey, the Global Director of Environment, National Resources, and the Blue Economy at the World Bank, Milo Laguro of Catholic Relief Services in the Philippines, and Cherner Baugh, Minister of Information and Civic Engagement of Sierra Leone. And to this list of distinguished alumni, we are now privileged to add Roberto Guerra, award-winning photographer and journalist. And so at this time, I would like to invite our own Ann Hainer, who's the Associate Director for Alumni Relations at the Kroc Institute, and also the person who kind of weaves the fabric of our alumni across the globe and keeps them in close contact with us and each other, to come up here and introduce our distinguished alumni winner. Thank you, Ann.
We are delighted today to welcome Roberto Guerra, or Bear, as he is known, back to the Kroc Institute, the Keough School, and to Notre Dame. Bear is a photographer and visuals editor whose work contemplates our connections to each other and the natural world while addressing contemporary social, cultural, and environmental issues. A photographer whose work focuses on globalization, human rights, social justice, and environmental justice. His documentary and editorial work has been exhibited in the US and abroad and has been published by outlets including the New York Times, ProPublica, Emergence Magazine, Orion Magazine, The Atlantic, PBS, and National Public Radio. In recent years, he has worked on projects in Mexico, Bolivia, Brazil, Panama, Peru, Turkey, and Thailand. Some of you might yet be wondering, how is photography peace building? The answer can be seen in Bear's summary of his work. We are so interconnected, he says, on so many levels. My challenge to myself is, how can visual storytelling connect the dots? How can it create a fuller picture of what's at play, and in doing that, advocate for justice? As a student at Notre Dame 3 decades ago, Bear studied anthropology and peace studies and took his first and only photography class, Introduction to Black and White Photography. After graduating in 1995, he landed a paid internship in Chicago with Amnesty International, where he actually worked under the mentorship of another of our distinguished alumni, Vienna Colucci. But it was while teaching English in Korea that Bear became fascinated by the power of photography to help people connect with the human and non-human world. During his career, Bear has been awarded fellowships in environmental journalism, international health and development, and his storytelling projects have received support from the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting, the Society for Environmental Journalists, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Eisner Foundation, among others. Bear is also the visuals editor at High Country News, a 5-decade-old nonprofit print and online journalism publication known for its thoughtful, nuanced coverage of the Western United States. At High Country News, he has led efforts to approach the magazine's visual storytelling more holistically and expansively, while prioritizing collaboration with artists from diverse backgrounds and experiences. He's also one of the organizers of the magazine's first labor union, and has contributed to making the organization a more equitable and sustainable workplace. A native of San Antonio, Texas, Bear now lives in Tucson, Arizona, with his partner and longtime collaborator, documentary storyteller Ruxandra Guidi, and their daughter. Reflecting on his experience at Notre Dame, Bear says, "I have the Kroc Institute to thank for a quote I heard here as a student. It was from Pope Paul VI. If you want peace, work for justice." Hearing that was a light bulb moment for me. To this day, I think of that quote in my work because as a photographer, when I've covered a story involving conflict of some sort, there's generally a justice issue at the root. Bear's career illustrates how peace studies can provide a foundation for an artistic career and speaks to the important role of the arts in peace building. Bear, I now invite you to join me on the stage. We are honored to welcome you back to the Kroc Institute to address the topic, Photography as Activism, Shaping Our World Through Visual Storytelling. The Kroc Institute is proud to recognize the creative depth and breadth of your work in photography and your commitment to visual storytelling that builds connections and prioritizes justice. We're honored to confer on you the Distinguished Alumni Award of the Kroc Institute. As described on the base of the award, we are confident you will go forth in peace. Congratulations and welcome back to the Kroc Institute.
Wow. Many thanks to everyone for being here. Actually, before I put on my reading glasses so I can see you a little better. Many thanks to everyone for being here, to Anne, of course, and the award committee and everyone at the Kroc Institute. It is truly an honor and truly humbling to be here together with you all. As some of you have heard me say over the last couple of days, it's also really hard for me to believe that 30 years have passed since I graduated and was last on campus. I'm sure those of you with a few more years under your belt, like myself, can attest to how quickly time flies. But it's great to be back. I can't say I really miss the South Bend winters too much, but I live in Tucson, so we're moving into the summer, so I'm trying to actually appreciate the cold here and store it for a bit. I'm especially grateful that the committee sees my efforts as a photographer and visuals editor as contributing to a more peaceful world. I suspect that many of you can relate to this, but most of the time we have our heads down, focused on the work in front of us. Receiving this award has allowed me to take stock and reflect on how my time here at Notre Dame has influenced me in my career. I also want to express my gratitude to Anne for connecting me with faculty, staff, and students who are having such thoughtful and thought-provoking conversations in their work and classrooms. I will leave here inspired and with a full heart. So again, thank you. I also want to thank the award committee for giving me an opportunity to put on a tie, because I don't do that too often. For those of you who are currently students, I hope that at the very least my presence here today might suggest to you that there are many paths you can take after graduation and many ways to continue your work as peacemakers. Although as children, we often imagine that life happens in a straight line, the truth is that for most of us, it's more of a winding journey where hopefully our interests, passions, and questions can serve as guideposts along the way. Growing up in San Antonio, Texas, as the child of a Mexican-American father and a secular Jewish mother who divorced when I was very young, shaped my worldview profoundly. During my teenage years, skateboarding and punk music also became important influences and gave me a sense of belonging as I struggled to understand my own identity and place in the world, when I often felt like I didn't quite fit in. This feeling of being an outsider drove me to question many things around me, including what we were being taught in school or seen in popular culture. I've always loved learning about other people, places, and realities, so studying cultural anthropology and peace studies here at Notre Dame was a natural fit. Though I had many light bulb moments while I was a student here, I want to share two that really had an impact on me and that continue to influence me as a photographer, visuals editor, and really as a human being. The first came during a seminar I took with the charismatic Brazilian anthropologist, Dr. Roberto da Mata. I'm sure some of y'all remember him from when he was here. We were just beginning to read his fascinating book about Brazilian society called Carnivals, Rogues, and Heroes, which opens with a quote by Portugal's most famous poet, Fernando Pessoa. Let me see if the slide shows. Oh, sorry, that jumped ahead. There we go. It said, "Today on the street, I met separately two friends of mine who had gotten angry at each other. Each one told me the story of their quarrel. Each told me the truth. Each told me his reasons. Both were right. It is not that one saw one thing, the other something else, or that one saw one side of the matter, the other a different side. No, each saw things exactly as they had happened. Each saw them according to exactly the same criterion. But each saw something different. Hence, each was right. I found myself perplexed by this double existence of truth." The double existence of truth. This was like a lightning bolt for me. Over the years, this awareness that truth is often more complex than it might at first seem is something that has guided my work and connected me with the people and places I've documented, even as it has complicated my role as a documentarian. How does one document the truth when there isn't always a single truth? Years later, I would learn about what Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie calls the danger of a single story. The idea that each person, community, or even nation is in reality comprised of many stories, and that we must challenge those who try to convince us of a single narrative. Those who control the narrative wield tremendous power, and it's our responsibility to challenge them. And here's another simple but profound idea that I learned in one of my peace studies seminars, and which Anne just mentioned in the kind introduction, but that I suspect this is familiar to you all. And that is, if you want peace, work for justice. As she mentioned, Pope St. Paul VI made this powerful statement in his World Day of Peace message in 1972. It's kind of a no-brainer, actually. How much of the conflict between individuals, communities, and even nation states can be traced back to one side feeling that they had not been treated fairly or justly? It brings us back to the double existence of truth and to the danger of a single story, doesn't it? I didn't formally study photography, journalism, or documentary storytelling, but a few years after graduating from Notre Dame, I came to realize that they offered the tools I sought to counter the single narrative, to show that there are other realities that must be honored if we're to have a deeper understanding of each other, of our communities, and beyond. As it turns out, anthropology and peace studies have proven to be the perfect foundation for much of the work I've gone on to do as a photographer and visuals editor. Coincidentally, next year marks the 200th anniversary of the earliest surviving photograph by the French inventor Joseph Nicephore Niesse. I apologize for the French pronunciations. Always a tough one for me. It took 8 hours or so of exposure by the sun from the balcony of his family's estate in Burgundy to make this faint impression. If you're feeling a bit underwhelmed by this image, you're not alone. But it's pretty mind-blowing to think of the countless ways that photography has become such a ubiquitous part of our lives over the last couple centuries since this humble beginning. To name just a few, photography shows us who we are, celebrates the places we call home or visit, preserves memories, documents important events, sells products, reveals things beyond our normal perception, and so much more. And perhaps most importantly, photography can even be a form of activism. An artist and educator named Cree Thawley articulates this quite well. Photography can serve as a memorial for lives lost, a visual claiming of space, and a way to humanize narratives. It can inspire and prompt action and awareness, bringing attention to issues that might not be commonly known, and making those that are known feel more real and impactful to the viewer through an employment of visual language. The photo itself can be a tangible form of activism, or it can be related in a more nuanced way. But regardless of how a visual image is employed in campaigning for social and political change, labeling photography as a form of activism allows us to view the camera in a whole new way. One of the earliest examples of this can be seen in the photos of child labor in US factories in the early 1900s, made by a former school teacher named Lewis Hine. Although there was some awareness at the time that children, often from poor and immigrant families, were being exploited, it wasn't until the public saw photos of this reality that the issue gained the attention it deserved and child labor laws were ultimately introduced. I'm sure we can all think of many times over the last several decades when photography has played an important role in shaping public opinion. There's the famous Earthrise image by the Apollo 8 astronaut Bill Anders, which is said to have helped kickstart the modern environmental movement. Photography was a critical component of the civil rights movement, especially images made by photographers who were collaborating with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and other groups. The image of a severely burned child running naked in the road after her village was bombed during the war in Vietnam played a profound role in shifting public sentiment of that war. And even just a few weeks ago, brutal images from the ICE raids in Minneapolis, including one of a 5-year-old Ecuadorian child named Liam Conejo Ramos being detained by agents, which I'm sure most of you saw, ignited huge protests and walkouts across the country. Seeing even a single striking image from a natural disaster or other tragic or unjust situation often inspires the public to take to the streets or donate to important causes or support humanitarian efforts. Photography shows us that which we might not otherwise be able to see, and sometimes it even encourages us to act. Unfortunately, photography hasn't yet made war obsolete, but we'd certainly be even worse off if we didn't see how horrific it is and have a record of it to hold those responsible for war crimes like genocide and other atrocities to account. This is why the press is now increasingly being targeted by those committing the atrocities. They know that people can't unsee what they have seen, so they are now trying to prevent us from seeing it in the first place. So now, 200 years after its invention, when most of us are carrying highly capable cameras in our pockets, and we're quite literally drowning in a sea of photographs. The most recent estimate I've seen, and I mentioned this in a couple different conversations over the last couple days, is that 5 billion photos are made every day. I'm not exactly sure how they came to that number, but we do know it's a lot. What role can photography continue to play to help make the world more peaceful? As a photographer and visuals editor at a monthly magazine, it's a question I think about quite a lot. I recently saw a quote from a talented young Ecuadorian photographer named Johanna Alarcón that I think really gets to the heart of it for me. How can we love what we don't know? And how can we defend what we don't love? Photography teaches us first to know and to love. From this starting point, we can collectively find ways to resist and to defend. Photography helps us appreciate and better understand our connections to each other and to the natural world. It helps raise awareness about the challenges we face and opportunities we have to address them. And photography can help us to know and to love so that we can value, but also defend if need be, especially today when so much that we care about seems to be under attack. I believe that if we're ever going to make the world a more peaceful place, we must first be able to empathize with each other. We also must be willing to challenge the single story. This is in large part what my work is about. Both as a photographer and editor, and I use we here because so much of this work is made in collaboration. We use the tools of storytelling to make the lives of others visible. We try to humanize topics that can be hard to wrap our heads around, like climate change, injustice, inequality, globalization, conflict, and more. We try to raise awareness about the things that need to be corrected in the world and celebrate the things that make life worth living. And we try to do this in ways that are thoughtful, emotional, and engaging, in ways that will hopefully help someone put themselves in another's shoes and recognize that we are all more connected to each other than we often realize. Over time, I have come to understand that the stories and issues I am drawn to are intersectional. The social is connected to the environmental, is connected to the cultural, is connected to the rights of humans and non-human communities, and so on. I'm interested in reflecting on the impacts of the severance of those connections and how we might restore them and protect those that are still intact. But there are risks involved in believing too wholeheartedly in the power of photography as an agent of change. With such an incredible glut of photographic imagery, its efficacy at showing us something new or surprising has waned, and we are now often becoming desensitized to both the beauty and horrors that photos might portray. As I'm sure many of you know, we're also at a particularly challenging moment in time for the medium, and for those of us working in the journalism and documentary fields, as evidenced by the Washington Post laying off all of their staff photographers just earlier this month. And one of the biggest problems with such an excess of photographs is that it's increasingly difficult to trust what we see in them. Now that we've quickly added artificial intelligence into the mix, even the most visually literate amongst us can find ourselves duped. Without going down the AI rabbit hole now, I will just briefly say that this new technology presents both very real threats and opportunities and will have profound impacts on the medium of photography in the coming years. It's up to us, though, to remember that it is a tool. And like the camera or computer or any tool, we have the choice to use it ethically and hopefully for good in the world. It's also up to us to hold those to account who use it to deceive. Despite the challenges for me, photography and visual storytelling and art more broadly still offers a sense of hope. Every time I release my camera shutter, there's the hope that I've captured something beautiful or interesting or thought-provoking. There's also the hope that someone else might feel a connection to what I saw, or be encouraged to use my work as a jumping-off point to learn something new, or maybe even be inspired to act. Again, I'm going to turn to the words of someone more eloquent than I, in this case, the photojournalist Ed Kashi. He said, "A single photograph may not change the world in one fell swoop, but it can change a person's mind, which is where change begins." So if my work as a visual storyteller can help change someone's mind or help them make connections they might not otherwise make, then hopefully that's one small step closer to making the world a more just and peaceful place. I'd now like to share just a few projects that have been important to me for the last couple decades. I hope that you might find something here that resonates with you. that might encourage you in your own efforts as peacemakers. So, actually, I'm going to take a sip of water really quick. So my work, as Anne mentioned in my introduction, the introduction is basically a mix of shorter term assignments and commissions for editorial and journalism publications, as well as longer term projects and collaborations with filmmakers, academics, and nonprofit, non-governmental arts and other types of organizations. For anyone who might be interested, you can get a sense of some of this work on my website. But as she mentioned, I'm also the visuals editor of High Country News magazine. Here are just a few covers. We're a monthly, so we actually do 12 issues a year. These are a mix of a few different covers from the last year or two. And at High Country News, I collaborate with other photographers, illustrators, artists, and the editorial team to create the visuals in the magazine. If you're interested in public lands, natural resources, indigenous affairs, or environmental, climate, and social justice issues in the Western US, I invite you to check it out. We do focus on the Western US, but I will say that what happens in the Western part of the country has implications for all of us. So I really invite you to check out some of the stories that we do. I've also been fortunate to be able to collaborate on many projects and stories over the years with my life partner, Ruxandra Guidi, who you may also hear me refer to as Rux for the rest of this talk, who's a talented and thoughtful journalist, editor, audio producer, and writer. Together, we create empathetic documentary storytelling to help others understand their own connections to communities and issues often underrepresented in the media. Here are a few images from one of the first projects that we worked on together, as it was an important one for us and helped set the tone for some of our work to follow. So, a little over 20 years ago, we became aware of a group of small campesino or peasant farming communities in the state of Guerrero in Mexico, where villagers had been quietly preventing the construction of a large-scale hydroelectric dam for a couple years. So this is about 2005, 2006. If built, this dam, ironically named La Parota, after a beautiful towering tree that is native to the region, it would have displaced over 25,000 small-scale, mostly indigenous farmers and flooded their fertile communal lands. This is the Rio Papagayo, which is the river that would have been dammed. So if they had constructed the dam, this all would have been submerged. One of the first things when we arrived there that they wanted to show us was how beautiful their land is and how fertile. So one of the Mexican government justifications at the time for locating the dam in this area was that this is barren. It's barren. There's nothing growing there. And so one of the first things they took us to see was what a lie that is and how beautiful and fertile, and you can see crops growing there. And it really is just a really beautiful part of the country. And there's a parota tree there on the left with Felipe Flores, who is one of the leaders of the opposition movement, standing below it. So you can really get a sense of how beautiful and massive that is. Also would be completely submerged if they had gone through with the dam. And that's Felipe on the right. So he took a break from farming to be one of the leaders of this opposition movement. And so what the community members had done is they set up blockades on every possible road that the construction vehicles could use to access the construction site. And they didn't let anyone in. And so this was just an amazing kind of David and Goliath story where actually they were winning. And so it had almost no coverage at all in the US. And so they invited us, we reached out and they invited us to come down and see what they were doing. And it was just really incredible. And so, to fully understand the implications of this project, one has to also recall that the 1990s and early 2000s saw a big push for globalization and the signing of several free trade agreements, such as NAFTA and CAFTA. So this dam was actually one part in a larger development strategy, which would build the infrastructure needed throughout Mexico and Central America to meet the increased energy demands and movement of goods that would come with the agreements. That photo on the left is Felipe and another community member Felipe and another community member are holding, is showing what that plan looked like. It was called Plan Puebla Panama, and showing how this particular dam connected their community out to this whole much bigger kind of scheme, you know? And while projects like La Parota, as I'm sure those of you who work on sustainable development would know, you know, a project like this is, first of all, it's billed as green energy, and it would typically bring some benefits to the community. Maybe in this case, some of these communities still lacked electricity, so that was one thing that the government was saying, oh, you'll now have electricity. And that it would bring jobs, but most of those are typically short-term, more in construction. But invariably, these types of projects have pretty profound lasting impacts on the environment and on the communities that live here. As I mentioned before, over 25,000 individuals would have been displaced. On the right is a map of the area that would be impacted, and you actually would have to look really close at it, but it shows where they had all of their blockades set up also. And so they were keeping an eye on, they had people staying in these blockades 24/7. So it was pretty amazing. This is Francisco Hernandez on the left, and then Marco Antonio Suastegui on the right. It just coincidentally, at the time that we were there, they had just been released. They had been picked up by the police, who everyone believed were paid by the construction company to pick them up. There are two of the other leaders of the opposition movement. So they were just released from jail, I think this day or the day before that we met them. But sadly, when we visited, the community was really divided between those in support of the project and those opposed to it. And I'm sure many of you have seen that this often happens with these types of projects, where some people in the community want to see it happen and others don't. And so it was causing a lot of conflict between friends and neighbors, even to the point of violence. And this photo on the left is Eugenia Cruz Zamora, whose husband, Tomas, who's in the photo there, had been murdered by their neighbor just for this reason, although they told us they believed that their neighbor had been paid by the company who wanted to build the dam to cause some violence and to instill fear in the community. And so there was an anniversary kind of gathering to honor Tomas when we were there. And so this, but you know, this is also a document of this place, because at the time that we were there, it was not so clear that they were going to be successful, or for how long they were going to be successful. And so this story was published in a great nature and culture magazine here in the States called Orion. Maybe some of y'all know it. And then was also included in a book and traveling exhibition, traveling public kind of installation that was put together by a Spanish NGO that highlighted water defenders around the world. And amazingly, to this day, La Parota has not been built. You know, the community has remained vigilant against it, but officially the project is listed as being on hold. So some people really still worry that they will try and restart it someday. Now, sadly, and it is a sad reminder that this work is never totally done, Marco Antonio Suastegui, who I showed that portrait of a little bit ago, was killed last year There's not been an official investigation, but he has been a lifelong environmental activist and defender of his community. And it's widely believed that he was murdered to silence his work. Not just about La Parota, but he has spoken out against other development projects. So a few years later, I received an assignment to go to the Peruvian Amazon basin region of Madre de Dios to make photographs for a feature story for a great publication that's actually out of a university called the Virginia Quarterly Review, a feature story they had about illegal gold mining. And so I traveled to Puerto Maldonado, where hundreds of artisanal miners had gathered to protest recent efforts by the government to crack down on their environmentally destructive work in the rainforest. So while there, these are a couple of the young guys who were protesting there, and they were from a mining settlement called Huepetue. While there, this story really helped me to better understand how complex some of these situations are, and how as journalists and documentarians, it's critical that we try to ask deeper questions about the many forces at play. In the case of Madre de Dios, poverty and a lack of opportunity at home pushes young men from the Andean highlands to come to work in the jungle, where they were causing severe damage to the ecosystem and also to themselves, to their own bodies, to make a better living than they could back home as subsistence farmers and herders, where a changing climate is making it harder to survive. So again, here's that idea of the truth being more complex than it might have first seemed. So during this time, I'm sorry, I haven't been speaking in the mic. I hope y'all have been able to hear me. During this time, I was able to visit some of the informal mining settlements that had were expanding kind of into the jungle. Now, this was quite a while ago, and at that time, what ended up happening is that the miners were successful in their protest, and the government backed down. So they were feeling really positive. And that allowed me to be able to visit, because typically they don't really want journalists or photographers in there. And so this is actually what one of these camps looks like. And so a lot of these young guys come down from the Andean highlands with their families, with their kids. And this is what some of these informal camps look like. And over time, they kind of move as they work in one area of the jungle. They'll kind of keep moving the camp, and then some of them, if there's enough gold to be mined in an area, they might even become a more permanent settlement. That's what happened actually with Huepetue. And so, as I mentioned, these guys are really, they spend 12 hours a day in the water. They use mercury to separate the gold dust and handle it with their hands. It's a really just sad situation. It's causing a lot of contamination, of course, and destruction to the environment. But and this is kind of what it looks like after they deplete an area. And unfortunately, there's a lot of these. If you were to look at a satellite image, this has now been going on for quite some time. While there, I came to realize that the mining that I saw was all made a lot easier by the near completion of another project made in the name of progress, a newly paved road from the Pacific coast over the Andes and down into the Amazon basin, known as the Interoceanic Highway. Here's a great, I don't know if anyone's read Ted Convery. He's an excellent journalist. If anyone's read his book about roads and highways, it's really fascinating. But in that book, he says, highways, of course, alter everything. They change patterns of human settlement, hasten the destruction of natural habitat, transmit disease, set the stage for clashes of culture. So I realized that there was a bigger story there about the road and the changes that the road were bringing to this region. I'm sure that many of you have seen similar things playing out in some of the areas where you work. But so here's a project that is financed by wealthier nations, in this case, mostly China and Brazil, to expedite the movement of goods between themselves and build something that will help bring prosperity to local communities. These communities, of course, deserve to be better connected and to have more opportunities. The question is, who is ultimately really benefiting in the long term? But so I went back several times between 2010 and 2014 to kind of create a portrait of life along this road and some of the changes that were happening, in the hope of inspiring others to think about how complex these situations are, and how roads can be not just roads, but even different types of development projects can be these sort of double-edged swords, where on the one hand they're bringing progress and opportunity, and on the other there are often these kind of profound implications. And so I traveled along this road from the start at the Pacific coast, basically to the border with Brazil. And so at Brazil, the road connects to the Transamazônicas, which is a road that then ends at the Atlantic coast. And so here, once this part was finally finished in 2011-12, you have the first paved route all the way across. And that brings some pretty profound changes. The road in Brazil was actually completed, I think, around in the 60s. And so you can also see some evidence of how things may be playing out along this. But so I was really interested in seeing just how families, as this road is kind of being finished, how families both are still doing things in, the way they've done it for a long time. So this is the Apasa family making clay roof tiles. They just live right off the highway there, and they're one of many families in this community that this is what they do, and this is what they're known for. I mean, people come from all over to get their roof tiles. But also just portraits of individuals that I met. I've always really loved this woman's jacket. It's so beautiful. She's a Quechua woman who was in one of the towns in the highlands called Ocongate. But also kind of documenting some of the unforeseen consequences. This is Julia Camacho, who sadly her husband had been in a car accident. So one of the unforeseen consequences is if you make a highway, people are going to travel very quickly along it. And so these communities were seeing an uptick in accidents and things like that. So that initial assignment to document illegal gold mining in Peru's Amazon basin led me again to ponder that complicated reality of development projects, which bring opportunity on the one hand, but also can have some negative consequences. So since its completion 15 years ago, the Interoceanic Highway has had a very profound impact on the region. It's accelerated migration. It has allowed for the expansion of illegal gold mining, logging, and poaching into the Amazon basin, as well as cattle grazing and large-scale agriculture and other activities that contribute to the environmental devastation of this, one of the most biologically diverse parts of the planet, as well as some pretty rapid cultural change for some of the region's traditional cultures. Here are a couple young brothers, and I rode up on top of one of the gas trucks, which are typically the way that young guys going to work down in the mines travel from their homes in the highlands down into the jungle. And so these are the Mamani brothers who were going down. And one of the other things that you see happening is that once miners are there, they also start to clear the land to set up their homes, some to graze cattle, and so you see a lot of these kind of impacts playing out. And then, of course, there is an increase in migration. And so at the time I was there, there were a large number of Haitians who had heard that they could get work in Brazil. And so we spent a lot of time with a number of folks who were just stuck waiting at the border with Brazil, hoping to get across and waiting for visas. I'm not sure if they ever made it or not, but it was pretty amazing to see. There were actually probably about 150 men, women, and children at the time we were there. I'm forgetting their name now, but these are Shipibo Kunibo environmental activists that we met also. So yeah, as I said, between 2010 and 2014, I made several trips back to kind of create a portrait of the region along the highway and to document what's at risk of being lost, also to just capture some of this moment of change, and also hopefully offering some opportunities to question what development means. Images from this body of work have been published in several print and online publications, used as part of a free curriculum for middle and high school students, exhibited, as well as used by researchers to support their work, and more. One of these will actually be on the cover of an anthropologist who's working on human trafficking and has a book about to come out from this region. So I'd like to turn from the last project I wanted to share with you all to one that is more local. This is one that Rex and I worked on in Los Angeles a few years ago. And it was probably about 10 years ago or so, we received an opportunity to collaborate with one of the local public radio stations in Los Angeles, KCRW, for those who know, on a year-long multi-platform storytelling project that explored the lives of older adults in the city. We had come across the demographic projections about the rapid aging of Los Angeles County, and we're interested in examining what we knew would be huge implications for the community. This is Mei Matsumoto on the right. We joined a group of residents of Little Tokyo, mostly Japanese American older adults. Mei, at the time of this outing, they were going to Santa Monica Pier. Mei was 94 or 95 and just amazing. She said, before we left, she said, "I'm leaving my cane at home," and just came along and we had a great time. But so we, like most of our work, we kind of started with a bunch of questions we wanted to explore. Why weren't more people talking about the significant challenges and new opportunities that were coming with this major demographic shift? What is it like to be an older adult in this city that glorifies youth? How do older adults find a sense of community in a city as potentially isolating as LA? How do they make ends meet in such an expensive city? What are some of the challenges they're facing? And perhaps most importantly, what continues to make life worth living as we grow older? These are just a small number of the people that we spent time with. It was a really enjoyable project to work on and remains one of our favorite. And so the way we approached it is we did 12 radio documentaries for KCRW. We had a website. We created a traveling photo exhibit. And so we kind of had a mix of personal vignettes and then other stories that kind of got at bigger issues. And this is Patty Balmaneda, who was one of the kind of more personal vignettes that we worked on, and that we spent a lot of time with her and told her story. She was really great. And so we're kind of thinking a lot about how, as a society, we really need to be talking not just about how we can live longer, but how we can live better as we age. These are some women who volunteer at a literacy program in Los Angeles. This is one of my favorite photos from this project. This was an Argentinian immigrant named Orlando. I'm forgetting his last name at the moment, but his grandfather had been a jeweler, and so he wore these really beautiful rings. But I just love how much life and experience is in his hands. So yeah, that year we spent a lot of time learning from many ordinary older adult members of the communities along the Broadway Avenue corridor, one of the most culturally, economically, ethnically, and linguistically diverse parts of the city. These stories were shared as a dozen or so radio documentaries and shorter stories. And then, as I mentioned, the traveling photo exhibit and several other things. We also made a free newsprint publication and that we left in public libraries so that everyone could really access this. We also knew that a lot of the people who were involved in this project probably weren't going to get the stories through public radio. And so we wanted to make sure that they had some entry point into all of the stories as well. And then there were a number of public discussions in different venues in Los Angeles. So I'll just share one last, one of the vignettes, and that was really about gentrification and housing rights in Chinatown and East LA. So here's a quote from Phyllis Chu, who is a volunteer, herself an older adult, a volunteer with a local community organization called Chinatown Community for Equitable Development. She says, here are people who are immigrants who speak no English and who don't know the laws of this country. How would they have known their rights? They're just being pushed out. Over and over again, almost everyone that we spend time with talked about housing as a major concern in Los Angeles. And so this story ended up being, we were collaborating with CCED, and they alerted us to the fact, something that was playing out with an SRO, which is a single room occupancy. Maybe some of y'all know about that. It is a type of housing, really low cost housing where you have your own apartment, but you share a bathroom and share kitchen facilities. And there was a building in East LA in Lincoln Heights, right on the edge of Chinatown, where it was recently purchased and everyone got eviction notices. All of the residents were in their 80s. All of them were immigrants. And as Phyllis mentioned, most of them did not speak English. They really did not know what to do and had nowhere to turn, but they fortunately reached out to this organization in Chinatown who helped them get organized. These are the Shaos, Mr. and Mrs. Shao. I actually just heard from Phyllis a couple weeks ago, and she told me that Mr. Shao had passed away, but that Mrs. Shao is still alive and still living here. So the story does have a happy ending. But folks from the CCED came and educated the tenants on their rights under the law and helped them get organized to push back. And so this is the first meeting with them. And you can see Mr. Shao there in the back, and then Mrs. Young sitting over to the left of him, and Mrs. Shao is in the front. And there were a few more people, I think, over on the other side. But then there was a whole process then of educating folks and empowering them to understand their rights and to fight back against this eviction. And so we spent a lot of time with them at different workshops, and just, it was amazing to see how involved and active everyone in this building became. And ultimately, they started having protests in the neighborhood and also connected with other individuals who were facing similar situations. This is our friend Kenwood, he didn't live in the building, but he's been a long time housing rights and other type of activist in Los Angeles. And there's Mrs. Young there on the right behind him. And so ultimately, I love this photo because there's Mrs. Young just leading the way down the street in Lincoln Heights, East LA, and ultimately they were able to stay in their building and stay in their home. And they're still there today. And Ms. Young is also still there today. So she was 85 at this time, and that was 10 years ago. So she would be in her mid-90s now. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. And I always love seeing her kind of leading the charge there. Thank you for listening.
We'll now welcome your questions. Bear will be happy to address anything that's on your mind.
Well, thank you for a really fantastic presentation and very inspiring. I just have a question about your technique. Like, I noticed that all of your photographs are in black and white, and I wondered if you might want to comment on that choice.
Yeah, so I do also photograph in color, but for me, black and white is really offers a more kind of direct emotional connection. You know, I don't know that necessarily is true for everybody, but it is for me. So I trust that also works for other people. You know, I think color can sometimes be distracting, but at the same time, there are some stories that you feel that just have to be told in color. And so, yeah, the ones that all these projects that I showed, and typically most of my more personal work, the longer term projects, the things I'm really most attached to, I typically shoot in black and white. Now, there is also a kind of practical and logistical reason as well, which is when you're photographing something over a long period of time and in a lot of different locations and situations, black and white can also be a nice equalizer and make things, I think, really then feel more coherent and kind of connected.
Thank you.
Sorry.
When I think about books on my shelf of the history of photography, there are pages about technical innovators and pages about aesthetic innovators, and sometimes there are chapters about small groupings of artists who have formed communities together to advance their creativity, their methods, and their creativity. But you're talking about a model of the artist or the photographer that leaves those three things behind and adds different kinds of organizing, different kinds of inquiry. And I wonder if many of our senses of who the artist or the photographer is need to be scrapped or updated.
It's a great question. So if I understand it, your question is whether or not this type of work fits into some of those traditions, or? I appreciate that. I mean, I actually feel like my work is pretty much in line with a fairly traditional idea of concerned photography or documentary photography. But, you know, yeah, do these ideas need to be, I don't know that they need to be scrapped, but I think that they are constantly evolving, you know, and that, yeah, that I think there's always room for kind of rethinking whatever categories that we have. So not maybe kind of dancing around your question there a little bit, but yeah.
Thank you. Hi. I noticed that as you were talking about your images that, you know, in most cases you named the people, they obviously, the images resonate strongly with you and the experiences you had while you were with them. How do you think about like more distant audiences, folks and how, how the images you create are going to connect with them. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I often try and have like a mix of really more intimate photographs, like portraiture and things like that. It's really is always the hope that people will make some type of connection, either with the individuals in there and can kind of empathize with them, or for some of these stories, that they'll have some questions about these bigger picture ideas also, and then something, I mentioned development a number of times, or ideas of sustainable development, that I often think that it really helps to see who is going to be impacted, what does that look like when you see the community that would actually be destroyed? I mean, I think we just it's one thing to read about these things. It's another thing to see data. It's another thing to, we need some ways, I think, to just help us connect on an emotional level. That's my goal. Like, I hope that people connect with it. And I think that people do probably connect with some images more than others, but, yeah, you're right. I mean, I really, when I see some of these images, it's like I'm thinking of that individual and the time that we spend together, so that can kind of be hard to convey in a photo, but I hope that others, when you look at a portrait, for instance, of someone who you might never have a chance to meet, like that there's some degree of empathy there. There's some degree of like, wow, okay, yeah, here's a real human being who's being impacted by this thing. So that's the hope,
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation, and congratulations to all your work and accomplishments. I was very impressed in how far you use photography relationally and how relation becomes graspable through your pictures. So that is something that is really, for me, really the chance to use photography for peace building, as long as we keep using photography in a relational way. So, and that brings me also to critical remark, or not a remark, it's more like a question that I want to raise, because in your introduction, I found it so interesting how you put storytelling, visual storytelling, as peace building and activism. And here I go along, absolutely. Where I lose track because of the danger of the single story is when you describe that sometimes as a photographer, and I have been for 20 years a photographer, distancing myself a bit at the moment from this identity, but the idea of having this single shot or the one picture that is really changing people's mind, isn't that the exact opposite of peace building? Because in times like these, when pictures can go viral and really change people's minds like this, isn't that kind of violating and maybe really severe violence? This is what I would not put on you. I really want to put it in general because it's moving me a lot. And it's also distancing me sometimes from photography as such a beautiful tool, actually. So that is, what I want to raise here. Thank you.
Yeah, an excellent point. I think that I mean, we are in a new era, I think, with photography and how it is, how ubiquitous it is, how much there is out there. But I do still think that there is the opportunity for a single image. There obviously needs to be contextualization. So that is where we get into some danger, is that, yes, images can be taken out of context. And I think that, yeah, in when we have more imagery, when we have more context, that is where the real power lies. But I do still think that there is the opportunity for an individual or a single image to change our minds in positive ways. But yeah, I don't know how well I can really answer that, because I think I don't see it though as the opposite of that exactly. Yeah.
Hello again. Thank
Hi.
you for everything you shared with us. And I really liked your question, because my question is sort of related. It has to do with your audience. Because when you talk about, wanting to change people's minds, what is that audience, that ideal audience that you're looking for? But then also, what is the meaning of the photos to people who are part of that resistance? What is the meaning for them? So there's like so many different audiences when you're looking at a photo, and some people are going to interpret it, bring their own, biases to it, and not really relate. So just a bit more about who is your audience? And I know it varies with each, issue, but.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think the audience is anyone who will be willing to engage. I think, these projects were made in collaboration often with people in the photos. And so, for instance, La Parota, they very much wanted, the folks who were part of this opposition movement very much wanted to get some additional attention there, and so the project about aging in Los Angeles, for instance, that was made very collaboratively, and so, but the audience is, I mean, I want anyone who will see the images to think about some of these questions about how we think about progress, how we think about, some of the things that we have come to take for granted, or that are part of the sort of ways things we're told need to be, or what have you. So I think that the audience is really, anyone, I mean, for being here, this is an amazing place, because so many of the people here are working on these issues, working on sustainable development, things like that. So any opportunity that I think we can have to connect on a human level, and that's what, I think that there's often a risk that we think photography can do. I still feel like photography often is best at raising questions and helping us to kind of think through some of these questions. But to me, the audience is, anyone who will really is willing to pay attention and to question their own preconceived notions.
Great. Hi, thanks so much, Bear. It's really great to learn more about your work. It was great to have breakfast yesterday. I wanted to follow up on similar strand, but it's about how you work with your quote unquote subjects and the issue of permission. So I love photography and try to incorporate it in my work, and where possible, use it as a way to create conversation and bring photos that I've taken of people before and come back and share them back. So my question is about how you gain permission to take people's picture and how you think about that. I find sometimes I feel uncomfortable doing it, and there are shots I have in my mind that I would love to have taken, but I didn't ask this woman if I could, or this child, or this group of people. And so I don't, and I regret it sometimes, but I also felt ethically that I couldn't or shouldn't without first having that level of trust. But then in some cases, like with the gold miners, I don't know, you're trying to document something and maybe you don't need permission. or you don't want it. So I guess my question is about permission of the subjects and how you think about it, and then how you, and the extent to which you go back to these communities. It sounds like you know all of the folks' names and you're in dialogue with them, but how you use photography to, or the quote unquote results of your work to continue the dialogue.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, by and large, there are some images that I will, typically anyone who's identifiable I've spoken to, or they know that I am photographing them. Like I'm not like sneaky about it. But yeah, like with illegal gold mining, for instance, there was also like this bigger story that that I wanted to document. But for instance, in the image of the big pit there, like there's someone down in there, but not identifiable at all, So like the miners, for instance, they all, like, we were talking, and so they knew I was there, and I told them why I was there and things like that. I try to make it as collaborative as possible to get permissions as much as possible. Like, for instance, the project, and that kind of depends. Like if you're working on a longer term project locally, like the one about older adults in Los Angeles, I mean, that was very collaborative. We're working with the same people over and over a year. But similarly, also anytime I do get to revisit a community, I bring photos or, bring other, if they've been published, like show people where they have been. But, there is like the Interoceanic Highway project there's also like this kind of broader view, that is trying to get at some of these bigger questions. And so I think there are times when you just maybe don't have the opportunity to speak to someone personally, what have you. But I'm sorry, there was a second part of the question that I'm kind of forgetting. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have 1.5 questions that come from a position of being completely uninformed about the world of photography. And that has to do with the technological changes of this day and age. I mean, on the one hand, you mentioned billions of images that have been taken daily, and then you have this as a form of art. And I'm wondering about the tension between these two worlds. How do you stay distinct? How do you make a difference in this world of billions of images? But these are not only billions of images, and that there are also these video clips, right? If you think about the Minneapolis demonstrations, again, from a position of being uninformed, I would think that the 30-second video clips on TikTok had a profound influence on how Americans perceive it, and perhaps even more than the single shot. So perhaps if you can reflect on that. And the other half question that I have is also about technology. You said that AI could have some positive attributes to your work. I wonder if you can.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've talked with several of you that are here today about this, but I mean, that is one of the challenges, is how, not just myself, but like as a visuals editor, how we break through, get people to stop and pay attention to our stories. Photography is my personal medium, but I also kind of group visual storytelling more broadly into this. So I think also video and things like illustration or art. It is a huge challenge, but I think that the way that we do break through a little bit is that, of those 5 billion images that are being made every day, a lot of them are things like selfies and food. And so, seeing black and white, for instance, is one way that maybe that might cause someone to pause just for a minute because it's a little bit different than what we typically see. Video is, yeah, I mean, it's also just such an important tool. I also really think that, and this is something that in the journalism world, we're still trying to wrap our heads around, but I think it's a really important part of this is the role that documentation by it's great to have professional photographers out there, but it's also really important to have everyday people documenting because sometimes that is what we respond to more emotionally. I think we just need to figure out ways to make sure that these things can all kind of work together to also challenge the, kind of to get back to that question about the single image. But I think that all of these things like kind of help us understand what's really happening. But it's a question that, I mean, we have it at the magazine, like how do we get people to pay attention, we all feel all that distraction all the time. AI, I don't want to be a total Luddite about it, but I do think that it potentially, if we are very transparent about its usage, very honest about its usage, that there will be opportunities for visual storytelling, for telling stories in new ways, for telling stories that, I can give you an example of someone, an experiment a photographer did that had a really big backlash, but I thought it was actually, he was forcing an interesting conversation. He has done a lot of work in Cuba. And a few years ago, so this is still when AI was pretty bad, you could tell it was AI, it was pretty obviously AI. He did this whole photo series of AI generated images of 1959 in the time of the revolution, when he would not have been there. He was not even born at the time. But what he put prompts in based on his many years of working in Cuba, many years of research there, put prompts in to try and recreate some of those scenes. And he was very clear that it was AI. He put it out into the world, out into the journalism world, and it was very clear as AI. It was like, hey, here's an idea. Like, can we use this to get people to connect with maybe historic events that we weren't there for or things like that? And there was a big backlash. Like, people were like freaked out about it, but I thought it was an interesting conversation. And I do think that in the future, as we start getting accustomed to AI being part of our reality, that there will be people who will use it in ways that maybe are more positive. It is extremely important that we're super transparent about the use of it, though,
Go ahead. Bear, thank you so much. This was really rich and fascinating. So much stuff to think about. I have a question and a half as well. I guess the half question is building on what other people have asked around, which is really around process and my thinking around photography itself as the activism, photography as peace building, in terms of the process from beginning to end, everybody that's involved, the money that's involved, how, if any, there is material, redistribution, like do you pay people and so on. We talked a bit about this earlier, all the way to the end. And so the question really is around, do you have you documented what activities, this gets to the relational peace building part, happen around all of this work that you're doing, the conversations that happen around it between the people who are being photographed, any kind of activities that build off of that? So thinking about the spiraling outwards of all of these interconnections that come from the photography project, and then them reflecting back and how they think of the images of themselves and what do they do with them, if anything, in the future. So that's the kind of half question. That was loads of questions in one. And then the real question, not the real question, but a question is what do you think about the role of documentary photographers in terms of having potentially a protective role for activists by taking their pictures and making it visible what they're doing versus possibly putting them in danger by taking their pictures? And do you have examples you could reflect on related to that in your experience?
Yeah, let's see, the first part, I think in the first part, not every project have we been able to kind of get that feedback from people. But there have been some. The one that really does come to mind where we have been able to was the one of older adults in Los Angeles. And so we're still in touch with many of the people in that project. And so, yeah, we do, like, at the end of that project, it was quite clear, like, how they felt about being in it and how they were portrayed and things like that. The other part of your question, though, yeah, it is definitely something I think about and always a concern if documenting activists. The key, I think, is collaboration and being very clear about like what the potential implications can be of putting your image out there. I think that 20 years ago, I think we all had less of an understanding of that than we do now, because now it's like social media has really changed everything. But at the time, for instance, as I mentioned, like La Parota, like they asked us to come, like when we had reached out, they asked us to come down and like wanted to get some attention on this, because there are times when it protects them by making them more visible internationally. It's like, otherwise we know what might happen, and so, but yeah, I think it is a challenge. It's an increasing challenge right now, for sure. And we, at the magazine, for instance, these are conversations we do sometimes have, like, even if we think about putting someone on the cover or not putting them on the cover, we always are asking them, like, if they're going to be okay with that, and if they know what that potentially means. So it's an ongoing conversation, for sure. And one that I think, like I said, that I think about differently now than I did 20 years ago. I mean, I tell you, I when I saw that Marco was killed last year, I definitely had the thought, like, man, I wonder if like our story that brought them some attention, like, led in any way to this. I don't really think that it did. I haven't been able to be in touch with him, but I don't really think that it did. He has been an activist like his entire life. But this was also one of those situations where probably having some visibility actually is part of what prevented the dam from being built for a while, and so I don't know. It's a challenge, for sure.
Bear, thank you so much for this wonderful talk and sharing your stories. And the question that I had is, if resources were no object, what story would you most like to be telling right now?
I think someone else asked me that yesterday, didn't they? I'm actually working on a story right now where I live in Tucson. That is kind of the story I want to be working on right now, so I feel pretty lucky. I wish that resources were no object and that there were more resources for it, but it's about, for those who know Tucson, Arizona. Tucson was situated where it is because of a river, the Santa Cruz River, which in the early 1900s, due to development, was completely depleted and kind of, the river just kind of disappeared for a long time. It was always an ephemeral river because it's the desert. But anyway, I'm working on a project right now with an organization called the Southwest Folklife Alliance about folklore related to the river. And since we had arrived in Tucson, I was really there are a lot of efforts not quite restoration, but people are calling a reconciliation with the river. So kind of, it's not really possible to restore it to what it was anymore, but it is possible to reconcile our relationship to it. And so that is in part restoration, but it's also kind of like meeting it where it is, but bringing nature back to it. They're trying to set up an urban national wildlife refuge along its banks and stuff. And so, yeah, for a while I had been wanting to do a project about that. And so I feel really fortunate that I'm getting to work on that. So that's maybe smaller scale than you were kind of thinking, but it's actually, the other thing is that I am really working a lot more locally than I used to. Like I used to like to travel a lot, but I really now am focused very on local stories. Like, yeah. Sure.
One more over. They say the best for last, but I'm going to disappoint you.
No pressure.
I have just a very simple question. Go back to that second or third slide about the two guys that were friends but were mad at each other because they saw the same thing the exact same way. People see photographs. It was a great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
And they see photographs, and it does bring out emotions on both sides. As a photographer and obviously involved more on the personal side, did you ever find yourself in danger from the opponents, the people who wanted to build the dam, that wanted to build the highway, or wanted to kick the seniors out? Did any of them confront you in any way?
I can't remember who I was talking to about this, but so on the project about the highway, working in the illegal gold mining camps, there were a few kind of tense moments, but I was collaborating with someone who was a local guy, and so he really helped with that. But a few years later, working with a Brazilian journalist, friend of my wife and myself, we decided to go and do a similar type of project, but on the Brazilian side. Because, as I mentioned, the Brazilian side was built in the 60s. So you could see, and if you, as soon as you cross the border, you can see the results of that. A lot of the Amazon rainforest was cleared first to graze cattle and then to grow soy. And so you'll see just like these, miles and miles and miles of soy fields there and stuff like that. And so this friend who's a Brazilian journalist, she actually lives in the US, but she and I decided to let's do a similar type of project so we can then see what might play out on the Peruvian side. And while we were there, we were interviewing individuals there's a landless peasant movement in Brazil. And while there, we were interviewing them. And then she reached out there was an area where we couldn't pass through. And someone suggested, oh, you're probably going to need a police escort to get through that area. And I was like, well, I don't know if we want to notify the police, but she's like, no, it'll be fine. I'll ask the police chief to do a interview for the story and it'll be fine. And so she alerted the police, and the next day when we got to the police station, they were nowhere to be found. And then, so we continued on our way. And then that evening she got a call from someone from one of the state agencies or something who said, we have heard that you are here reporting on this and we prefer that you don't. And she's like, well, we're already here. And, but then, so we were a little bit nervous, but then what ended up happening is the next day, we still don't fully know what had happened, how this transpired and how this happened, but we were with actually a local activist group and they said, oh, we want to take you to go see something. So they took us to see this kind of tourist little place. And they're like, we'll just be a minute. Just leave your stuff in the car or whatever. I never leave everything in the car, but this time I left like one of my bags. She left all her stuff. And by the time we got back, everything had been stolen. And so it was pretty clear that like, okay, they really don't want us working on this story. And so that definitely threw a wrench in the works there for that one. But that's probably the only time that really happened quite that way.
We want to invite you to continue the conversation with Bear at a reception outside and join us for that. There's also an exhibit of a number of Bear's works on the Interoceanic Highway project that you can look at up close and read more information about those out in the Hesburgh Center. Also, just to alert you that next week we have our 32nd Hesburgh lecture in public policy on March 4th, I believe, March 5th. Get the dates right, at 4 p.m. in McKenna Hall. And that will be with Ambassador Samantha Power. So we'd invite you to join us for that as well, our next major Kroc Institute event. Thank you for coming today. And thank you, Bear.
Thank you.